story. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that there are no signs from Russia that it wants to end the war. He emphasized that Ukraine's allies, including Europe and the United States, can pressure Russia towards a diplomatic solution. Here's what the Ukrainian president stated.
На жаль, поки що ми не бачимо сигналів від Росії, що вони хочуть закінчити війну. Але я впевнений, що наш союз, союз передусім Європи, який з початку війни з нами, і союз Європи з Америкою нам допоможуть збільшити тиск на Росію, щоб перейти до дипломатичного вирішення цього такого складного питання, яке так важливо для спокою в Україні, для миру сталого в Україні і для миру і безпеки в Європі.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron confirmed that European leaders are ready to provide security guarantees to Ukraine once a peace deal is signed. As international leaders meet to discuss the next steps, questions remain over the viability of these guarantees and continued US support for Ukraine's security. Let's listen in to Macron's statements.
Nous sommes prêts, nous, Européens, à apporter les garanties de sécurité à l'Ukraine et aux Ukrainiens le jour où une paix est signée. C'est l'engagement que nous avions pris à Washington. Les contributions qui ont été préparées, documentées, confirmées cet après-midi au niveau des ministres de la Défense de manière extrêmement confidentielle me permettent de dire, voilà, ce travail de préparation est achevé, il sera maintenant endossé politiquement et il nous permet de manière solide, et nous reviendrons vers vous demain après ces réunions et ces échanges, de dire que nous sommes prêts à une paix robuste, durable pour l'Ukraine et pour les Européens.
Professor Popovsky, how much leverage does Ukraine's allies in Europe actually have to pressure Russia into a diplomatic track, given the current dynamics on the battlefield?
I think they do, and that's now a serious conversation already. Having seen the absolutely united support for Ukraine from all over the world, by the way, not only Europeans support Ukraine, apart from maybe a dozen of presidents who met in China earlier this week were the only ones who do not support Ukraine. The rest of the world does. And growingly, and as President Macron very sophisticatedly said, it is going there, one step after another. We wish it happened faster, to put that pressure on Russia to basically surrender its own demands, which are absolutely unacceptable, absolutely irrational. And on the battlefield you mentioned, Thomas, there is not much movement. On the battlefield. It's very much a stalemate. There is a very little advance here and there by the Russians, but very quickly after that, we see the news from Kupiansk, we see the news from Dobropile. Every time then the Russia kind of reports some success, after a few days it's reversed back into way it used to be before. And somebody calculated that with that advance, Russia needs another 5 years to get only to Donetsk region, not the rest of Ukraine. So you can imagine what is the so-called military success by Russia. It's not non-existent. So with pressure on Russia from sanctions and from military support to Ukraine, diplomacy will only work if those two things happen, pressure on Russia and military support to Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia will not surrender. So that's the way to go. And once that happens, once somehow Vladimir Putin realizes that there is no outcome here, he's losing the battlefield and he's losing more and more support. He doesn't mind how many soldiers he will lose. He can lose another 1 million soldiers. He can lose another 5 million soldiers. For him, human life does not matter. But what does matter are the energy sources. So Ukraine very correctly targets the oil and gas, refineries and supply routes and pipelines. And that, by the way, also works. There's a quite successful case over the last week. We've seen the Russian energy sources diminish. Yes. And that's another strategy which is very successful.
Professor Popovsky, just briefly, just before we close off these updates, do you think the United States is still an ally to Ukraine under Donald Trump?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Talking about United States, not about Donald Trump only. If we take the entire establishment, the Congress, it's not only one president, you know, the entire American nation is supporting Ukraine. The only problem is Donald Trump, that narcissistic egoist, and also criminal, by the way. Let's add him to the list of criminals, because he must be in prison, not be in the White House. So, yes, America does support Ukraine, but only the president is the problem there.
Professor Veselin Popovsky, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us and taking the time. We now move over to the Middle East for our next story, where Israeli Prime Minister